Right now on Morning News Now, controversy on the campaign trail, an ominous warning from former President Donald Trump talking about the consequences of a Biden re-election.
If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
Trump's team says he was talking about Chinese car manufacturers, but the Biden campaign calls it a threat of political violence. This as voters in several states prepare to head to the polls for primary elections. We'll have the latest. Also this morning, another funding fight taking shape on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers now facing a Friday deadline to approve several bills before a partial government shutdown. More on negotiations and what's at stake. A landslide victory for Russian President Vladimir Putin in a three-day election that, with no real competition, was all but decided. We're going to take you to Moscow for the results, plus Putin's message to his country. And let the madness begin. That's right, it's time to fill out those brackets. March Madness is back. We're going to have highlights from a thrilling Selection Sunday and look ahead to the men's and women's tournaments. Can you predict this year's Bracket Busters? Good to have you with us on this Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We begin a new week with the race for the White House. Voters in 5 states will head to the polls tomorrow to cast their ballots in their state's primaries. The general election matchup between President Biden and former President Trump is coming into focus after they locked up their nominations last week. President Biden's campaign announced it raised $53 million in February. As for former President Trump, well, he sparked controversy over the weekend with comments made at a campaign rally in Ohio. Mr. Trump offered a grim outlook while discussing the possibility of a trade war with China over auto manufacturing. Take a listen.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
All right, NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen joins us more on the state of the race. Those bloodbath comments drew a lot of headlines. He also, though, continued to criticize President Biden. Let's hear a little bit of that, and then we'll talk on the other side.
The fastest way to reverse every single Biden disaster is to very simply just put me back in office. We'll get it done quick. But among my very first actions upon taking office will be to stop the invasion of our country and send Joe Biden's illegal aliens back home.
All right, so, John, what are some of the takeaways from Trump's campaign speech over the weekend that made so many headlines, including reaction to those bloodbath comments?
Yeah, there's such attention to those bloodbath comments, in part because Democrats and Trump critics interpret them to mean that he is, and the Biden campaign said this, that he is threatening political violence. Now, if you listen to this speech, he was speaking specifically about Chinese cars being made in Mexico and talking about the economy more broadly. His campaign says, look, this is ridiculous. He's using the word bloodbath to mean what's going to happen to the economy if the United States isn't sort of more protective of its markets. So, there's a little bit of a he said, she said in this. Obviously, former President Trump has said things that are more clearly linked to political violence than what he said over the weekend. But a huge moment in terms of the controversy and the public drama going on there.
Let's talk about President Biden, his re-election bid. New reporting over the weekend on NBCNews.com details the president's anger and concerns about his polling numbers, saying he has grown angry and anxious. What more should we know about this?
Yeah, let me connect the dots here a little bit, Joe. What President Biden is seeing is he's not doing as well as he would like to in polls. Very specifically, there are swing states, particularly Michigan and to some extent Georgia, where he's got Democratic voters who are very supportive of Palestinians and their conflict with Israel right now, and so as a result of that, he's frustrated. He's frustrated looking at the polling, thinking he's doing the right stuff on public policy, and at the same time, the poll numbers don't show that. And should just connect it a little further here. He has been very angry with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not getting to a ceasefire, which would be very politically helpful to Joe Biden in the United States.
We'll talk a little more about that later in the hour. John, as we mentioned, 5 states are holding primaries tomorrow. So even though the nominations have been locked up, why should we care about how well the candidates perform in these events?
For most of the states, it doesn't matter that much, Joe. The sad truth is that American general elections are fought, in just a handful of battleground states. But for the 2 presidential candidates, I think, folks are going to be looking to see how they do in the swing states that that are on the ballot. So you look at Arizona in particular, maybe to a lesser extent Florida, and to a lesser extent Ohio. People are going to look and see what their numbers are and try to extrapolate from that what the general election is going to look like. I'm personally a little skeptical of whether the primary tells you what's going to happen in the general, but that's the reason that these candidates, and particularly their supporters, are going to look at the primaries tomorrow. All
right, Jonathan Allen. John, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Stop me if you heard this one before. On Capitol Hill, another crucial federal government funding deadline is approaching yet again for Congress. Lawmakers have until Friday to vote on and approve these 6 remaining appropriations bills to avoid another potential partial government shutdown. Earlier this month, President Biden signed a funding bill to prevent a shutdown, keeping several agencies funded through September, but that did not cover the whole government. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Batali joins us now with the latest. So, Ali, walk us through what's at stake this week. What are the agencies that do still need to have that funding approved by Congress?
Joe, what's wild is I just took 3 months to go on the campaign trail, and I thought for sure by the time I got to Capitol Hill again, they would be done with funding the government for this upcoming year. There I stand corrected, because here we are once again. This was always the concern with a laddered CR approach, the idea that you were going to do this in 2 buckets. Of course, the government funding crisis of last week averted at the last minute. Now we're watching Congress scramble to do it again, but with new agencies on the board. We're talking about places like the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, and then bigger ones like State and the Department of Homeland Security. That's what makes this so tricky, though. The fact that you're dealing with, yes, the same number of appropriation bills technically, but the places and things that are being funded are much thornier issues, which is why this funding deadline could be a problem. We're not quite in crisis mode yet.
So, Ali, see, they need you there to get stuff done. That's probably the biggest issue.
I think that might be the lesson. Yeah. Yes, of course.
So really, though, realistically, though, besides you being gone, what are the biggest challenges for lawmakers? Is this similar to what we saw earlier this month, or are there some key differences this time around?
Look, it's similar because we're watching the same themes play out, but in a different forum. Because, of course, the last set of funding bills were centered around different things, but we're now watching the entire scrum over the border really come to focus yet again. We watched, of course, as that bipartisan package came together at the beginning of the year and then fell apart, largely because of former President Trump and his acolytes saying they wanted to keep it as a live ball during the upcoming election season. But now what we're seeing is a lot of haggling over funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, House Republicans, no fans of Alejandro Mayorkas. That, of course, is something that they have continued to use as a cudgel against President Biden. And so we're watching them now continue to fight over funding for the Department of Homeland Security on the issue of the border. Of course, that wasn't the only holdup, but I think right now, when we look at the thing that's really outstanding, it's the idea that they might do funding for the Department of Homeland Security slightly differently than the rest of these funding bills. But again, all of that remains to be seen.
And remind us, if we do see a partial shutdown here, what happens? What's the impact?
It's going to be big. Shutdowns are difficult for government workers, especially those who are asked to continue going to work and not getting their paycheck until government funding is actually accessible and done in the Congress. Of course, we know these things can drag on for a while. And again, we are not in a shutdown posture yet. But if it did shut down, because places like the Department of Homeland Security are on the table, that means that TSA workers, if you go to the airport, they still have to go to work, and they're not doing it with a paycheck. We have seen during shutdowns before why that becomes a drag and why that becomes difficult. But also when you're talking about things like potential Treasury funding, we're getting into tax season. That could be difficult if this is a funding battle that drags on. Again, we're only at March 20th right now, 21st. We're in the teens right now. The funding expires on March 22nd. They've got time, but we will need to see a bill soon in the early part of this week, especially especially because House Republicans demand 72 hours to read these bills. That means that time is going to be elapsing as they read. That puts the Senate in a squeeze towards the end of the week. So again, we do expect them to avert the shutdown, but there are real problems looming here.
All right, Ali Vitale, as always, thank you so much. Today is the official last day of winter, but it is going out with a bang. Millions across the East are facing freeze threats. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with the forecast. Michelle, good morning.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you. And yeah, we are starting out chilly, at least ending winter, starting spring out chilly tomorrow. We're looking at temperatures tonight into Tuesday morning, well below freezing in many spots. So you want to cover any sensitive plants. That's mainly in the southeast. So 23 million people impacted by freeze alerts. Tonight into tomorrow morning, we have freeze warnings. That is in that hot pink color. So places like Memphis, Little Rock, Jackson, Montgomery, Atlanta, up to Charlotte, we'll see freeze conditions as we go throughout tonight. It's going to be a chilly afternoon, too, in many spots. Kansas City, well below normal for this time of year in the 40s, the low 40s, 14 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. Also in the 40s in Nashville, Atlanta, you're just going to be at 59. That's 7 degrees below normal. And even down to places like New Orleans, just temperatures in the mid 60s. We're going to see another cool day tomorrow, but this is what it looks like overnight. I was talking about those freezing temperatures. So below freezing, well below freezing in Nashville, just 27 as we wake up on Tuesday morning. Same story in Huntsville, below freezing in Atlanta, Tuscaloosa. We're right near the freezing mark in Macon. So again, you want to cover those sensitive plants, protect those pipes as well. I know we had some really warm weather for a couple weeks, and that's going to change as we go throughout the overnight hours. And then we're going to be cool again tomorrow. This is the first official day of spring tomorrow. 2 below, you're just at 61 in the 50s in Nashville. And then we're back into the 60s by Wednesday, so near 70 degrees. It's a quick rebound as we go throughout Wednesday and Thursday, back into the 70s in Atlanta, 71 on Wednesday and also Thursday. Very winter-like, too, along the Great Lakes. We have that cold air going over the warmer lake waters. So especially downwind of Lake Ontario, we have some winter weather advisories. We could see anywhere from 5 up to 9 inches of snow. That is really wet snow, and that's going to cause some problems there. This is what it looks like on radar, where you see the blue. That is that snow swirling and falling. And we're going to see that throughout the day also tomorrow. And this is going to shift kind of into the interior parts of the Northeast. But you could even see this snow making its way into portions of central Pennsylvania. Wouldn't be out of the question to get into southeastern Pennsylvania as well. That's going to be the story tomorrow. Then again, making its way into the northeast parts of the interior parts of the Northeast. So winter is still holding strong in parts of the country, but the West, we're well above normal. We could even see some record highs today.
All right. Well, a little bit of everything still as we prepare for official spring. All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Sure.
A cross-country manhunt is over, with police arresting a man accused of killing a New Mexico State police officer and a South Carolina paramedic. Officials say the suspect, Jeremy Smith, was captured early Sunday morning following a foot chase that ended in a shootout. NBC News correspondent Priya Shrithar has more.
A 2-day cross-country manhunt has come to an end after a police shootout. 33-year-old Jeremy Smith was captured after allegedly killing a police officer in New Mexico before he was captured by authorities after being spotted by a gas station clerk.
During this time, as they had an eye on Mr. Smith, a foot pursuit ensued. Shots were fired. Some shots strike Smith.
Authorities say Officer Justin Hare stopped to help Smith with the flat tire on Friday morning when Smith allegedly shot and killed him. Police say Smith pushed Hare's body into the passenger seat before taking off in his patrol car, which was later found abandoned.
The last words Officer Hare uttered on this earth was to offer help to a man who was about to kill him.
Police say when Officer Hare first approached Smith, he was driving a car that belonged to 52-year-old Phoenicia Machado IV, a South Carolina paramedic who was reported missing by her family on Thursday. Friday, her body was found, and authorities say Smith is a person of interest in her death.
We want to extend our heartfelt condolences to that community for their loss of a fellow first responder.
Tributes from across the country are pouring in for the two victims. Machado IV is remembered as a loving mother and grandmother and dedicated first responder. And 35-year-old Justin Hare, a devoted father of 2 girls who had another baby on the way.
We'll now be able to spend some time focusing on honoring him in the best way that we can and grieving his loss.
Authorities allege Smith has a very extensive criminal history that includes charges of burglary, taking hostages, and armed robbery. He's the third New Mexico State police officer lost to violent crime in the last 9 months. Priya Sridhar, NBC News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is celebrating a landslide re-election victory after 3 days of voting that offered no real alternatives. There were some protests, but Putin used his victory speech to declare Russia is united behind him. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Moscow. He was at that news conference and questioned Putin directly. Keir, good morning.
This morning, Joe, I'll tell you that countries like Iran and China and North Korea are congratulating President Putin, but a spokesperson for the National Security Council saying the elections are obviously not free or fair, given how Mr. Putin has imprisoned opponents and prevented others from running against him. This morning, President Putin beginning another 6 years in power after an election that saw dye poured into ballot boxes, arson attacks and drone strikes Russia blamed on Ukraine. Putin won the biggest victory of his leadership, Russian officials say, after years of crushing opposition leaders like Alexei Navalny and Boris Nadezhdin, who told us he voted by writing his initials on the ballot. NBC News was the first international news organization to question the Russian leader after the election.
Mr. President, journalist Evan Gershkovich spent this election in prison. Boris Nadezhdin, who opposes your war in Ukraine, wasn't allowed to stand against you. And Alexei Navalny died in one of your prisons during your campaign. Mr. President, is this what you call democracy?
That's life, Putin said, and in his answer suggested he had agreed to release Navalny on the condition he never returned to Russia. Days later, his outspoken opponent was dead, Putin said. His widow, Yulia, joined a protest in Berlin Sunday as Russians demonstrated at polling stations by simply standing in line.
There could be no any negotiations and nothing with Mr. Putin because he is a killer, he is a gangster.
The Kremlin's spokesman rejecting criticism of the election.
Alexei Navalny's widow is calling on leaders around the world not to accept this election.
Well, you know, those are people who get themselves deprived of their motherland, and they're staying abroad. The longer they stay abroad,
her husband died in
the longer they stay abroad, the less connection they have with their own country.
All right, Keir Simmons, Keir, as always, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much. For more on this, let's bring in Ambassador Bill Taylor. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, is now the vice president, Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, what does another 6 years of Putin's rule mean for Russia? Just what are some of your thoughts after hearing his answer to Keir's question there?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. So what it implies for Russia is more of the same. Clearly, Putin is going to continue to pursue his war, his aggression in Ukraine. Clearly, he's going to continue to oppress the Russian people, giving them no ability to express their views. Clearly, he is going to continue to push against the international order that tries to maintain some rules of the road. Mr. Putin says he's got 87% of the vote. That's like North Korea, Joe. I mean, this is not a serious election.
Putin's re-election comes at a time when the Ukraine war is at this crossroads. Ukraine is running dangerously low on supplies and ammunition. Efforts to send funds to Ukraine have stalled in the American Congress. Russian forces are making gains in the war. I know you just got back from Kyiv. What did you see? What's at stake here?
At stake is the security of Ukraine, but it's more than that, Joe. You're exactly right. What's at stake here is the security of Europe and of the United States, which is why it's so important, as you just indicated, to provide those funds to allow the Ukrainians to stop the Russians in Ukraine. That's what's at stake. The Russians are moving across Ukraine. They're trying to take Ukraine so that they can threaten Europe. And that's what's at stake here right now. And Ukrainians, as you say, they're looking very carefully at what happens in the United States. They count on us. They count on the United States to continue to provide them the support so that they can do the fighting, so that they can stop the Russians. They're not looking for any other assistance like soldiers. They're looking for weapons that allow them to stop the Russians.
So in January, Germany's defense minister warned that Russia could seek to attack a NATO member state within 5 to 8 years. We know the Danish defense minister said last month Russia is going to test Article 5 and test NATO's solidarity within a 3 to 5 year period. So what does Putin's reelection mean for Russia's diplomatic ties? Could this reelection try to embolden Putin to actually challenge NATO members and challenge NATO solidarity?
So Putin is in office at least until 2030, probably until 2036 if he lives that long. So yes, he is emboldened now. He's got now he can call up more forces. So he can do this mobilization. He can do a bigger draft than he has been able to do up until now because it's very unpopular. So this is a problem for the Europeans. This is a problem that Putin is providing, is showing that he's got the intent to move across Ukraine, and the Europeans are right to be concerned. Europeans are right to be increasing their support for Ukraine. They're right to be increasing their defense budgets so in order they can stop the Russians as they move across Ukraine and threaten them.
All right. Ambassador William Taylor, as always, we appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, enrolled and in debt. Incoming college freshmen now facing the reality of rising tuition. We're going to break down the costs and the options. Up first, doubling down. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refusing to back down from plans to invade southern Gaza. More on the move that could force action by the U.S. We'll be right back. We're back now with the latest on the war in the Middle East. Over the weekend, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeated his military's plans for an invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. That's where some 1.5 million Palestinians are taking refuge. The move would set up a potential showdown between Israel and the White House, which has called a military operation against Rafah a red line. Right now, aid agencies are sounding the alarm over the dire circumstances on the ground in Gaza. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll has now surpassed 31,700, including at least 30 people who've died of malnutrition. For more on all this, we're joined by NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez, who's in Tel Aviv. Raf, good morning. Let's start with that planned military incursion in Rafah. Do we know what the latest is there?
Joe, good morning. Over the weekend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approving what he says will be a two-phase plan for that attack on Rafah. He says an assault is necessary to defeat Hamas's remaining battalions in the south of the Strip. He says in the first phase, Israel's military will evacuate more than 1 million civilians out of the city, allowing them to go to some areas further north, not allowing them to go back to Gaza City. The second phase will be the attack itself. Now, President Biden has said that an attack on Rafah would be a red line. He has given slightly mixed messages here, saying that at the same time, there's nothing Israel could do that would lead him to actually cut off military or diplomatic support. The White House has said any attack on Rafah would be a disaster without, quote, a credible and executable plan to get those civilians out of harm's way. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying he had not seen Israel's plan, is not yet in a position to judge whether or not it's credible. But we are also hearing from the UN that any attack on Rafah not only would lead to massive loss of civilian life, it would also disrupt the flow of aid coming in through the Rafah crossing from Egypt.
And we'll dig into that a little more with our White House correspondent in just a moment. So, Raf, let's talk about peace talks. Reuters reports that those talks did resume in Qatar on Sunday, and this new round of talks comes after a new proposal from Hamas. What are we learning about that?
Right. So, Joe, I spoke to an Israeli official this morning. They say Israel's spy chief, the head of the Mossad, is leading the Israeli delegation heading to those talks in Qatar. They say optimism is not high. You'll remember we have been here again and again and again, round after round of talks in Qatar, in Cairo, in Paris, in Warsaw, and still no breakthrough. We are 10 days into Ramadan, which was the White House's goal for getting ceasefire agreement in place. That goal not met. The basic framework for these talks is a 6-week ceasefire in exchange for Hamas releasing around 40 Israeli prisoners, most of them women, 40 Israeli hostages, most of them women. Israel would be expected to release several hundred Palestinian prisoners in exchange. But the details here are proving to be the devil. And at this point, Israeli officials are saying they are not optimistic about a breakthrough.
And amid all this, Raf, the United Nations warning around a quarter of Gaza's 2.3 million residents are one step away from famine. On Friday, a ship carrying that desperately needed food and humanitarian aid did arrive on Gaza's shore. A second aid ship is expected to set sail. Real quick, what's the latest on this situation?
Yeah, so that first ship full of food from World Central Kitchen, the American charity run by chef Jose Andres, that ship arriving on the coast of Gaza, the aid taken to land. It has not yet been distributed, according to World Central Kitchen. Not totally clear what the holdup is. A second ship now underway. This is the beginning of what President Biden hopes will be a maritime corridor for getting more food into Gaza. But the message we are hearing, Joe, again and again and again from humanitarian organizations is that this is no substitute for getting more food in by land through both Israel and through Egypt, and that the big problem here is that there is such insecurity on the ground, especially in northern Gaza, that you cannot get this food safely distributed to the people who need it. These humanitarian groups saying it really is going to take a ceasefire to get food to where it needs to go. Joe.
All right. Raf Sanchez. Raf, thank you so much. Let's talk more about America's response to what's happening in the Middle East. Bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. So, Monica, as Raf just reported, if Israel does move forward with the military incursion of Rafah, it would be in defiance of the Biden administration and so many world leaders. What are you hearing from the White House right now?
Yeah, Joe, for weeks, the Biden administration has been demanding to see this so-called plan. And really, there's a high level of skepticism that there even is a fully formed plan here for going into Rafah. And instead, this may be something that Israel was really trying to put out there publicly to hold leverage over Hamas so that Hamas believes this is imminent, but maybe it's not. But the president and his top aides have said that without any kind of a plan for trying to really move those more than 1 million people who are sheltering there, it would be unacceptable for Israel to do this. And here's what we heard from John Kirby, the White House national security spokesman, on Friday about that.
We still can't get behind a plan, and we won't get behind a plan that doesn't properly account for those 1.5 million refugees in Gaza who need a place to go where they can be safe from the fighting. But to move in right now in a major way without a proper accounting for all those people would, as we've said, be a disaster.
And the U.S., of course, since the terrorist attacks of October 7th, has said that it will stand with Israel. The president has pledged Israel's right to defend itself. But you really have to look at the language, Joe, since then to now. And that has become just much more blunt. The Biden administration has been much more clear. But there's also a concern that some of these warnings will just be ignored. And that is why the Biden administration now needs to weigh what its options would be if indeed Israel does defy the president with a large-scale military invasion in the coming days.
We even have this deadline now. The Biden administration set a March 24th deadline for Israel to provide written assurance that its use of American weapons is in accordance with international law. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, and so far there has been no instance where the U.S. has conditioned aid to Israel. Is that something we could see change? That would be a major policy shift in this war. That hasn't happened yet, but they have always said that they do need those written assurances that also any weapons that are going to be supplied to Israel are going toward the fight to eradicate Hamas, but will not hinder any humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. And that's something that Israel has signaled they are going to comply with. But now the State Department and the administration as a whole needs to review it and approve it to make sure that that is actually in compliance with that international law you mentioned.
All right, Monica Alba. Monica, thank you so much. More international headlines now. The European Union just signed off on a multi-billion-dollar aid package for Egypt. NBC News International correspondent Claudio Labonga joins us from Rome with that and other world news. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. That's right. The European Union, as you mentioned, signed or announced an $8 billion aid package for Egypt as concern grows over migrants going to Europe due to growing conflicts in neighboring countries. Now, the deal was signed yesterday by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, the package includes both grants and loans spanning for the next 3 years. Now over to Iceland, where Mother Nature has struck yet again. A state of emergency was declared in in the southern Reykjanes Peninsula after a volcanic flare-up, the fourth since December. Strong and fast lava flows reached the already mostly evacuated town of Grindavik. The lava flow's possible path is located close to a geothermal plant that provides hot water to most of the region, causing concern of minor explosions and infrastructure damage. The area's famous Blue Lagoon was closed also until further notice as a precaution. And finally to Dublin, where the streets were filled with pints, pride and shamrocks as thousands celebrated St. Patrick's Day over the weekend. Over 4,000 people participated in the parade procession in the Irish capital city, including performances by groups from Bolivia, Brazil, Georgia and Ukraine. Even the sun poked its head out of the clouds as locals and tourists from around the world cheered on bagpipers while waving Irish flags in an array of festive hats and fake or real ginger beards. Back to you, Joe.
All right, lots of noises going on there between the bagpipes in the video and whatever's happening behind you there, Claudia. Thank you so much. Coming up, TikTok. Time could be running out for TikTok here in the U.S. After the break, we're going to bring you the latest on efforts to try and stop a ban from advancing on Capitol Hill. Also, the prescription problem involving a new class of weight loss drugs now in high demand. You're watching Morning News Now. Welcome back. The immediate future of TikTok in the U.S. is at a crossroads. Last week, the House of Representatives passed a bill that would ban TikTok in the U.S. if ByteDance, the Chinese-based company that owns the popular app, doesn't sell it. The bill stems from concerns over a foreign adversary having access to so much data from American users. TikTok's aggressive lobbying to stop the bill from advancing in Congress was not enough to prevent the overwhelming bipartisan vote in the House, though its future in the Senate is less clear. Critics worry about national security and the mental health of young Americans. So what is the future of TikTok? Our own Savannah Sellers takes a closer look.
You will be destroying small businesses like us.
TikTok creators descending on the Capitol.
Save TikTok!
You need to make your voices heard.
Call them and tell them to stop the ban.
Hoping to save the social media giant. TikTok appealing directly to its users.
And we had millions of kids calling Congress, in some cases threatening suicide.
Even flying creators out to Washington.
They're trying to rush a vote to block TikTok.
What would it mean for you and your family if TikTok were to be banned in the U.S.?
It would be devastating. Being able to just launch out a positive message would be completely stopped.
But in the end, the bill passed in a landslide.
The yeas are 352, the nays are 65.
And now heads to the Senate. If signed into law, it would force TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to sell the platform within 6 months or face a possible ban in the U.S., its biggest market. TikTok says around 170 million Americans use its platform, including 7 million small business owners. Many of them now worried about their livelihoods.
It is 100% of our income. It's how I feed my wife and 3 children.
But lawmakers say the move is a matter of national security.
This app has the potential of being a mass surveillance tool against American people.
Critics pointing to laws in China that allow the communist government to demand data from any Chinese-owned company. Several countries, including the U.S., have already banned the app on government devices.
We worried about the spy balloon hanging over the U.S. You know, a lot of people put this out. It's 170 million spy balloons.
Another fear, the power and reach of a hugely popular foreign-based platform that's readily accessible to millions of Americans, many of them teenagers.
The reason that is valuable to the Chinese Communist Party is it begins to allow them to know how to influence Americans.
But TikTok CEO Shou Chew insists the app is not a tool of the Chinese government.
There's a lot of noise, but I haven't heard exactly what we have done that's wrong.
Meanwhile, any possible sale of the app could prove costly and complicated.
One of the issues is, what do you get when you buy it? Because they're not going to give us the algorithm, because if they give us the algorithm, we can see, in fact, if they've been spying.
Former Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin already looking to assemble a group of investors.
This should be owned by U.S. businesses. There's no way that the Chinese would ever let a U.S. company own something like this.
The current bill does not allow the government to remove TikTok from people's phones. Instead, it would be unavailable to download or update. But in countries like India, where TikTok is already banned, savvy users were quick to find workarounds. It all comes in a consequential election year, with both parties desperate to woo young voters.
Do you think this could impact how people vote?
100%. There will be people that will not be reelected because of the way they choose to vote on this ban.
Faced with uncertainty, some TikTok users already preparing for the end.
And who knows if today is the day and this is the last video.
As the app, known for its global reach and viral moves, now stands increasingly on rocky footing.
Our thanks to Savannah Sellers for that report. They're effective and expensive. The new class of prescription weight loss drugs is helping Americans shed pounds, but for those who need the drugs, filling a prescription can be a nightmare. NBC's Stephanie Gosk takes a closer look.
170.6. There are plenty of testimonials touting the new class of weight loss medications.
It works.
What is less common, the stories of people who can't get it.
Are there people out there who desperately need this medication and don't have access to it?
Absolutely. Our Medicare and Medicaid populations are some of the most at risk, and they do not have access.
Dr. Lori DiMattia works at a weight loss clinic outside of Oklahoma City.
So we've talked about healthy living. Are you back there?
I have been.
One of her patients is 67-year-old grandmother Susan Beam.
I have hypertension, which is, I think, directly related to the extra weight. I've had to have hip replacements and rheumatoid arthritis and sleep apnea. If you could snap your fingers right now and lose the weight, how many pounds would you like to lose? Would you hope to lose? I would hope to lose about 120 to 130 pounds, which is basically like another person.
Beam's Medicare coverage will not cover the new class of drugs that the FDA has approved for weight loss. She hopes Congress will pass legislation to change that.
Well, I think it's extremely urgent. I don't know at what point it will impact my health, even to the point of death.
Oklahoma has the third highest obesity rate in the country. But according to healthcare analytics company Purple Lab, the state ranks 27th in rate of prescriptions written for Ozempic and Wegovy. And the price of those drugs is high, roughly $1,000 a month. Many health plans don't cover the cost. Getting insurance coverage is a constant headache for Dr. DiMattia.
So difficult that we hired someone who specifically deals with just prior authorizations for the medications.
That's their only job?
That is their only job.
Purple Lab's data also shows that while black people in the U.S. account for 32% of obesity cases, they are only getting 12.5% of Ozempic and Wegovy prescriptions.
I hope that people have enough grace to, understand that this is bigger than just willpower.
Liz Shoemate is another of Dr. DiMattia's patients.
I don't think the goal for me is perfection, but it's to be in good health.
She's hoping to get the newly FDA-approved Zepbound at a discount. But even discounted, that's $550 a month, and still a stretch out of pocket.
Obesity is a disease. These patients that have this disease are humans, and they need treatment.
And there's a treatment out there that works.
There's a very effective treatment that works, and we're really struggling to get it to the people who need it the most.
Being part of what doctors call a weight loss revolution often comes at too high a price. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, Norman, Oklahoma.
Coming up, we are talking tuition as a new class of freshmen gets ready to go to college. Many might be trying to figure out how they're going to pay for it. We're going to break down the options with one of our favorite financial experts, Caleb Silver, next on Morning News Now. It's almost officially spring. By now, many high school seniors across the country have received those college acceptance letters. It is an exciting time to hit such a major milestone, but of course, it also comes with big expenses and big decisions. Tuition and fees for college more than doubled in 20 years, leaving many families to worry about covering the cost of enrollment. So how can you tackle those high prices, even borrow money if necessary? Our money guy, Caleb Silver, the editor-in-chief of Investopedia, is here to help answer the question. So you know this firsthand. These costs could be intimidating. What's your advice? How can you maybe try and cut those costs down a little bit?
Yeah, if you're looking for inflation, you're going to find it on campus. And we're going through this right now with my high school seniors. So lots of decisions. These are decision days for colleges and families. This is a big family financial decision. But in some cases, if you have a few schools schools that want your kid. Some of them are offering money. You can actually negotiate with those admissions departments. You should have your kid do it, not the parent. It's much more personal that way. That can be pretty effective sometimes. You can also apply for study grants and scholarships. There are scholarships ranging from $1,000 to $15,000. You got to dig for them, but you can bring down the cost that way, and there are also some grants you can apply for.
I love the negotiating thing. It's like your kid's a free agent.
That's right. Hey, it happens.
Student aid is obviously a huge thing. I know I relied heavily on that when I was a kid. Who should be looking into these options? What are some of the best options?
Yeah, well, there's the Pell Grant. Those are needs-based, no repayment on those loans. Then those are direct and indirect loans. Some are subsidized, some are unsubsidized. You can get those through Sallie Mae. There's other lenders right there. The Biden administration is working on ways to bring down the repayment of that debt. Then there's state tuition assistance. If you want to go to school in-state, you can sometimes get in-state tuition as long as you live there. And then there's employer tuition assistance. If you have a job, if you've been working or your kid's been working, sometimes the employer will help subsidize part of that education.
It's not just tuition. That is high enough, but you got room and board. You got the dining plans. You got the books you got to buy. What are some of the things families should keep in mind when it comes to all those financial obligations?
Yeah, you named a bunch of them, but then there's also the travel back and forth from school. Don't forget that. If it's not a train ride away or a bus ride away, that means a flight sometimes, right? That means shipping some things home. Those are the costs that come around that. But also, if your kid's going to go away for the semester, sometimes that's covered in tuition. Other parts of it aren't. So you got to be thinking about all of these factors and then teach your kid or work with your kid on how to be a smart spender while they're in college, because this is where the habits really develop.
Here's one of the things I think some families are wrestling with. I know I had my dream school, the one I wanted to go to, but I was worried was too expensive. And then you have your sort of backup choices. And thankfully for me, the dream school ended up costing about the same because of financial aid. So I was able to go there. But for some families, it might be a different situation. The dream school costs more. How do you make that decision as to which school you should eventually go to?
Yeah, ultimately, it's an opportunity decision. Are you going to do better potentially if you go to this school? Will it pay off in terms of networking, in terms of career advancement? But also, if you're looking for that dream school but you can't afford it, sometimes take a couple of semesters at a community college, then transfer the credits over, go in there as a sophomore, as a junior to the dream school. If you got into it, that'll reduce the cost. Come in with some credits. That helps sometimes too. But this is a big decision for families, and it's all about what you can afford now and what it might mean on the back end, because there's a lot of people rethinking the cost of college, given what we've been through in the last 4 years.
Thank goodness your daughter has you to help walk her through it right now. All right, Caleb Silver, thanks so much. Appreciate all your tips this morning. Financial headlines now. Interest rates are back in the spotlight this morning as the Federal Reserve prepares to meet this week. CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with more on that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yes, so Wall Street is on FedWatch this week as investors wait for guidance from the Federal Reserve on the future of interest rates. The markets are coming off a negative week as concerns about inflation have pressured stocks, sparking some anxiety. The Fed may be leaning towards keeping rates higher for longer. The Fed begins a two-day meeting tomorrow with a decision Wednesday afternoon. And also in focus this week, we get data on housing and jobless claims plus earnings from FedEx and Nike. Apple is reportedly in talks to license Google's Gemini AI engine to power some features in the iPhone. Bloomberg says Apple also recently held discussions with OpenAI about possibly using ChatGPT. Now, a deal between Apple and Google would build on their partnership in search. Google has paid billions of dollars to make its search engine the default option in the Safari web browser on Apple devices. An AI deal would give Gemini a major edge as Apple has more than 2 billion devices in active use. And LinkedIn is developing games to give users something to do other than search for their next job. So TechCrunch has confirmed LinkedIn will tap into puzzles that help games like Wordle explode. Early efforts are games called Queens and Cross Climb. One idea LinkedIn is experimenting with involves organizing employee scores by workplace, with companies being ranked by those scores, Joe.
All right. A distraction to some, or
yes.
a welcome break for others. All right, Silvana.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Coming
up, let's dance. That's right. It's time to fill out those brackets. March Madness is here. What you need to know from the top seeds to the underdogs. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now. We're back now with a toast that might make you see stars. NASA says its James Webb Telescope spotted a kind of chemical cocktail in space. A team of astronomers found a bunch of different organic molecules, including ethanol, also known as alcohol, around two baby stars called protostars. You could call it a Cosmopolitan. Now, this doesn't quite mean we'll be shaking up a margarita on the space rocks at Club Milky Way, but NASA does say these findings might help us learn more about our solar system's past and future. Sounds like even outer space can't turn down a good night on the town. Those cocktails in that video, not the ones that were actually in space, by the way. Finally this hour, sports lovers can rejoice. March Madness is back, college basketball's biggest month. The final brackets for both the men's and women's tournaments were revealed during the highly anticipated Selection Sunday, when the top teams in the nation find out if they're in or if they're out. Now it's time to start filling out those brackets. Here with all you need to know about this year's March Madness is staff writer for The Athletic, CJ Moore. CJ, good to have you with us. So after last night's highly anticipated Selection Sunday, any surprises? And in the first round, what are the matchups you're looking forward to most?
Well, the committee had a very difficult task of putting this bracket together because there were a lot of bid stealers this weekend. So I'm not sure I exactly agree with all the picks, but we've got a bracket and it should be fun. And some early games that I am interested in is Drake, Washington State should be fun. Grand Canyon, St. Mary's. Those are some games that I could see some upsets coming. And then McNeese, Gonzaga, Kansas, Samford. That's another little pod to keep an eye on.
Always kind of weird to not see Gonzaga as one of the top seeds, so we'll have to see how they do this year. Obviously, folks are going to be watching Caitlin Clark as she tries to get the Hawkeyes back to the championship. A reminder for everything she's accomplished. She hasn't won that championship yet. On both the men's and women's sides, what are the biggest headlines you see going into the tournament?
Well, on the men's side, I think Connecticut's bid to repeat as a national champion. I think the Huskies are probably the most complete and best team in the men's bracket going in. And then, a lot of eyes will be on Purdue. Last year, losing to Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round. Purdue's going to try to pull off what Virginia did in 2019 and go from losing to a number 16 seed and to winning the national championship. And I think the Boilermakers are one of the best two teams in the country. Zach Edey's back and had a wonderful year, should be National Player of the Year. Braden Smith, their sophomore guard, has really improved. And, a lot of people just assume that Purdue is going to Purdue again. But I think it's a much better team than the Boilermakers were a year ago. And so I don't see that happening. And I got him in the national title game. I would love to see Matt Painter get there because he gets a lot more flack than he deserves. He's a really good coach.
Got it. So you do not think Purdue is going to Purdue again. All right. So let's talk about those brackets. A lot of people are wondering maybe if there's any underdogs that they should be looking out for. What do you think?
If you're looking to pick some underdogs, I would go in the West region of the bracket. I think that I don't think the committee did a great job as far as like you look at the East where UConn is. I think there's they've got maybe arguably the best 2, 3, and 4 seeds. Not an easy path for them, but in the West, I think there could be chaos. New Mexico's a team I've got going all the way to the Elite Eight. Really, really good guard play. Richard Pitino, the son of Rick Pitino, his team has kind of been up and down, but they're finishing really strong. Jamal Mashburn Jr., the son of Jamal Mashburn's on that team. So some familiar names for those who've been covering or following college basketball for a long time. That's probably my biggest dark horse, and I've got Alabama coming out of that region, going to the Final Four seed. So that's if you're looking for chaos, that's the region to kind of go crazy.
We only have 20 seconds here, but who is in your Final Four? Do you see most of the 1 seeds making it?
I've got Connecticut, Purdue, Marquette, and Alabama in my Final Four.
All right. Well, a lot of
2 1 seeds.
All right. And, of course, we can never predict what the bracket busters are going to be, but it's always fun to watch. CJ Moore, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stay with us. The news continues right now. Good morning. Good to have you with us on this Monday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, off to the races. A fiery weekend in presidential politics. Former President Trump once again sparking campaign trail controversy with a series of searing remarks in battleground Ohio.
They're not people, in my opinion. These are animals, okay?
We've got more from that contentious campaign stop as the Biden campaign says it's raking in some record-breaking cash. In Russia, a projected landslide victory for Vladimir Putin in the country's closely watched presidential election. Putin claiming he's clinched another 6 years in power with a staggering 87% of the votes. Our Keir Simmons is in Moscow this morning, his back and forth with the Russian leader over the death of Alexei Navalny. Trouble in paradise. Police in one popular Florida beach community searching for suspects in a St. Patrick's Day shooting. One person is dead, 2 others wounded. The spring break violence comes as a Florida teen is arrested after pulling a gun on a crowded beach. Well, in Fort Lauderdale, an ugly fight caught on camera, sending people scrambling for safety. The emergency curfew enacted in Miami Beach that officials say is keeping the peace there. And the stage is set for the big dance. March Madness officially begins with 2 top-seeded men's and women's teams once again trying to vie for championship glory. Good to have you with us. We're going to begin this hour with the general election rematch between President Biden and former President Trump. The first presidential rematch in more than half a century is coming into sharper focus after both locked up their party's nominations last week. Over the weekend at a campaign rally, former President Trump vowed there would be a, quote, bloodbath if not reelected in November. As for President Biden, his campaign is touting a record fundraising haul. NBC's Garrett Hake joins us from Washington with the latest on the race. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, a lot of headlines out of this weekend, but it was that comment about a bloodbath that's drawing the most attention as Republicans and Democrats debate what the former president said exactly and what he might have meant by it. And it comes as the Biden campaign does announce that record fundraising haul, which they will need for what is appearing to be a bitter and expensive campaign to come. Donald Trump on the attack this weekend in Ohio, lashing out at some of his favorite targets, from the criminal cases against him.
It's all politics. It's all coming in from Biden.
What he claims are the criminal migrants crossing the southern border and destroying the country.
They're not people, in my opinion, but I'm not allowed to say that because the radical left says that's a terrible thing to say. These are animals, okay?
But it was his use of the word bloodbath during a riff about Chinese car makers that's creating new headlines and headaches for his campaign.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
The Biden campaign seizing on the remark and rejecting the Trump campaign's claim that it was about only cars.
The idea that they're going to be able to spin their way out of this today is ridiculous because every single day Donald Trump is promoting and endorsing and encouraging political violence on the stump.
Elected Republicans largely shrugging off the comment, including Mr. Trump's former VP turned rival Mike Pence, who has said he will not endorse his former boss's re-election campaign.
I see him departing from the mainstream conservative agenda that has defined the Republican Party over the last 40 years.
Meanwhile, the Biden campaign announcing a record fundraising haul of $53 million in February, leaving the campaign flush with $155 million in the bank. On Saturday night, the president attending Washington's white-tie gridiron dinner, joking about both real and fictitious accomplishments, including, quote, rigging the Super Bowl for Taylor Swift. The 81-year-old also cracking a joke that his 10 p.m. speech came, quote, 6 hours past my bedtime. From jokes back to the deadly serious, former President Trump is also drawing bipartisan condemnation this weekend for continuing to refer to people charged or convicted of January 6-related crimes as hostages, whom he now says he would pardon if he's reelected. Those comments keeping January 6 in the headlines at a time where most other Republicans would like to move on. Joe?
All right, Garrett, thank you so much. Now, with the general election matchup set, there is a new group of voters that could decide the outcome of the race. They're called double haters. That's because they don't like either candidate. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster spoke with voters in the important swing state of Wisconsin to see how they feel about this presidential rematch.
Excuse me there. How are you? I'm from NBC News. Can I ask you a quick question? First thing that comes to mind.
Oh, boy.
What do you think when you see these two options?
Not great.
In battleground Wisconsin, the choice these swing voters face in November is one they prefer not to make.
Are you excited about these being your options?
Quite honestly, no.
I can't say that I'm happy about either option.
What's the word that you think when you see these two candidates running for president?
Oh, hell no.
They're the so-called double haters.
Why is it them two again? It happened 4 years ago.
And they could decide the election by holding their nose and voting for one of the major party candidates, choosing not to vote at all, or...
I'd like to have more choices.
Well, funny you say that, because asking you shall receive.
Well, look at that.
Does it change at all if I do that and give you a third option?
Depending on who that is.
Coca-Cola or Pepsi? Maybe we do need a third option.
Support for third-party candidates is one of the biggest wildcards this election. In a February poll, 21% of voters backed third-party candidates, with independent Robert F. Kennedy grabbing 15%. For context, in 1992, Ross Perot snagged 19% of the vote in what's considered one of the more successful third-party bids. And the options may grow. The group No Labels is vowing to field a unity ticket, pairing a Democrat with a Republican.
If somebody steps up to the plate other than these two, I would consider it.
But the challenges are massive, getting on the ballot in all 50 states, fundraising, and navigating hot-button issues like abortion. But perhaps the biggest hurdle...
If the third-party option makes it easier for Trump to win, would you even consider it?
Oh, no.
Absolutely not.
No.
I believe it would be disruptive.
Perot was blamed for taking votes away from George H.W. Bush and giving the presidency to Bill Clinton. Just as Ralph Nader is still attacked for shifting liberal votes away from Al Gore in 2000.
Just doesn't get any closer than this.
But for many of these double haters, they want to have the choice to vote with their heart.
Could you see yourself voting for a third party in this election?
Absolutely, I could.
Shaquille Brewster, NBC News, Wauwatosa, Wisconsin.
Now to Russia, where Vladimir Putin is set for another 6 years of power after winning a landslide victory in presidential elections there. Putin's re-election after 3 days of voting comes as no surprise. The opposition has no voice in the country, and he faced no real competition in the election. The three other men on the ballot all represented parties loyal to Putin. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Moscow with more. So, Keir, I know you got a chance to speak with some of the voters there over the last 3 days. What did they tell you?
Well, many of them, when you speak to them, particularly those who were going to vote, told us that they were voting for President Putin. There's no question that he is popular in this country, in Russia. That being said, that's different from the results that we're now getting from Russian officials, suggesting that he's won 87% of the vote and that the turnout was 77%. I mean, just that turnout, which is important to the Kremlin, is perhaps surprising, given that many, particularly younger voters here in Russia, told us that, well, what's the point in voting because we know who's going to win. So a 77% turnout, a historic turnout, with that kind of feeling amongst some Russians that we spoke to here in Moscow at least. Look, this is a country of 11 time zones. It's very difficult to judge what people think collectively in such a huge landmass of a country. But I think ultimately the fact that President Putin has won is not surprising because he's popular, but also because, frankly, this was a staged, managed election.
So, Keir, Putin delivered a victory speech in Moscow. Then you were at the news conference and questioned Putin directly. Let's quickly listen to that.
Journalist Evan Gershkovich spent this election in prison. Boris Nadezhdin, who opposes your war in Ukraine, wasn't allowed to stand against you. And Alexei Navalny died in one of your prisons during your campaign. Mr. President, is this what you call democracy?
Great question there by Keir. What was his response?
Well, he focused actually on the question, the part of the question about Alexei Navalny, which was surprising because he very rarely, when Alexei Navalny was alive, used even his name. In fact, it's difficult to find record of him using his name. So for him to use his name now, his answer that was a surprise. He described his death as an unfortunate incident. And he then did make some news by suggesting that he had been agreeing to have Alexei Navalny released from prison as long as he didn't come back to Russia just days before Mr. Navalny died. So, I mean, clearly that kind of explanation is going to be viewed very cynically by many Russia watchers and critics. But President Putin gave an answer that made headlines and will be surprising many people.
And Keir, people did gather yesterday in a protest that was inspired by Navalny. What do we know about that? Were there any other protests?
Oh, well, there were. I mean, there was arson attacks, there was dye poured into ballot boxes, and then, as you mentioned, Alexei Navalny had called for this idea of noon on Sunday, people just to gather in silence. And then at noon on Sunday, there were people standing in line. You can see the pictures. Because of the nature of the difficulty of protesting here, it's hard to know what each person exactly had in mind. But that's what we saw, and that's what happened. Alexei Navalny's wife, by the way, who was part of that took part in the demonstration in Berlin, she's called for global leaders not to recognize this election. And I asked the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, about that when I got to him after that Putin press conference. Take a listen.
Alexei Navalny's widow is calling on leaders around the world not to accept this election.
Well, you know, those are people who get themselves deprived of their motherland, and they're staying abroad.
She says that her husband was killed in a Russian prison.
This is not the case. There was quite great news about this initiative to exchange Navalny for someone. Then the attitude of President Putin showed his openness.
And Joe, today we do have something of a split screen with countries including China, Iran, North Korea congratulating President Putin. Western leaders, not so much, suggesting this election is not free and fair. Joe.
All right, Keir, we appreciate your great reporting over these last few days. Thank you so much. There are new developments this morning in the push for a ceasefire in the Middle East, even as Israel's prime minister lashes out against growing U.S. criticism of its war against Hamas. For the latest, we're joined by NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. So, Raf, we're going to get to those talks in just a moment, but let's begin with Israel launching another raid on Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa. This is a place we've talked about before. What can you tell us about what's happening now?
Yeah, Joe, the Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip, once again a battlefield this morning. Israeli forces stormed inside in the early hours. They say they tracked down and killed a senior Hamas operative who was hiding inside of the hospital. But Palestinian officials are saying this is another example of Israel targeting a medical facility, something that is a potential war crime. They say that there are multiple casualties reported inside the hospital. What we do know is that there were thousands of Palestinian civilians who were sheltering there, hoping the hospital would give them some measure of safety, that they might have access to humanitarian supplies there. Israel says it is not ordering patients, doctors out of the hospital itself, but they are evacuating the areas nearby. And once again, you are seeing scenes of Palestinians running away from battle in northern Gaza. Jeff.
Let's talk about those ceasefire talks continuing this week in Qatar. Any hope for any progress?
So, Joe, I spoke to an Israeli official this morning. They say optimism on this side of the negotiating table, at least, is very, very low. The Israeli delegation is being led by the director of Mossad, Israel's top spy chief. The basic framework here is familiar. They are going back and forth about the possibility of a 6-week ceasefire that would lead to the release of around 40 Israeli hostages, some several hundred Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, and a lot more humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. This Israeli official saying they are not optimistic about a breakthrough. They say there is a lot of American pressure on both sides to try to get to a deal. But the White House was hoping to have a deal in place by the start of Ramadan, March 10th. And here we are with no sign of one coming together. Jeff.
Raf, I also want to ask you, last week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called for new elections to replace Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, calling him an obstacle to peace. What are we hearing from Netanyahu about that?
Yeah, so these comments from Chuck Schumer, the most senior Jewish official in the U.S. government, really landing like a bomb here for the Israeli government. I want you to take a listen to the frustration that Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed about that speech.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate.
It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. Oh. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
Now, you heard the Prime Minister say there a majority of Israelis support his policies. That's partly true, depending on how you look at the polls. Majority of Israelis do support an attack on the city of Rafah in the south of Gaza. Those same polls, though, show Israelis want early elections, and those polls indicate Prime Minister Netanyahu would lose those elections. Jeff.
All right. Raf Sanchez. Raf, thank you so much. Turning now to new developments in the murder of University of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley. This morning, her father is speaking out for the first time, sharing his heartbreak over his daughter's death. The 22-year-old was found dead on campus last month. Her suspected killer is behind bars awaiting trial, and the case has become an issue on the campaign trail. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Athens, Georgia, with more. Priscilla, good morning.
Joe, good morning. Laken Riley's name has become a battle cry in the fight over partisan border politics. But this morning, her father tells us that he wants his daughter to be remembered not only for how she died, but also the way she lived. Who was Laken to you?
She was like an angel.
This morning, Jason Riley speaking out for the first time, describing his 22-year-old daughter, Laken, as an avid marathon runner with dreams of one day becoming a nurse and working with children.
We were looking forward to seeing her graduate next year. She was so full of life. I just hate that, she was taken so early.
Police say Laken was murdered while jogging on the University of Georgia campus last month.
I wake up every day thinking, that I can call her. And I can't.
Police have charged 26-year-old Jose Antonio Ibarra with her murder. Ibarra, a Venezuelan citizen, entered the U.S. illegally in 2022, officials say. And despite an arrest in New York and a citation for shoplifting in Georgia, was never deported. Do you think a difference in immigration policy would have made a difference for Laken?
We have no idea if that would have changed anything, but he's here illegally. That he might not have been here had we had secure borders.
Laken's murder has become a flashpoint in the partisan debate over immigration. Former President Trump meeting with Laken's mom and stepdad earlier this month, just days after this tense exchange at the State of the Union. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene imploring President Biden to say Laken Riley's name.
Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal.
I feel like she's being used somewhat politically.
How do you feel about that?
It makes me angry. She was much better than that. She should be raised up for the person that she is.
An angel on earth, her heartbroken father says, now gone far too soon. What gives you strength?
Knowing that she's looking down on me. It has made me so much stronger.
Powerful interview there. Priscilla, I know there are some new developments in the case. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Joe, while the suspect has not yet entered a plea, we do now know that he is demanding a jury trial according to court documents. And Laken Riley's family also preparing for what is sure to be a difficult trial. But her father told me that he is heartbroken not only for his family, but also the family of the suspect. And that if he were to see the suspect's mother, he would want to give her a hug because he believes that's what his daughter would have done. Joe?
Wow. All right. Priscilla, thank you so much. Appreciate your reporting on this. Time to get a check on your morning news now. Weather meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with a look at the week ahead. A little bit of everything, right?
That's right. We have everything. We have winter weather. We have some spring-like weather. We have some storms in the south. So, yeah, let's start out looking at the week ahead because today we're looking at a couple things. Record warmth in the Pacific Northwest into portions of the west. We're going to see temperatures well above normal. Then we have a dividing line. Really cool in portions of the east. We're going to have freeze warnings mornings tonight into the early part of Tuesday, but pretty dry. We have some showers in the southwest. Lake effect snow along the Great Lakes, especially downwind of Lake Ontario. We could see up to 9 inches in some spots. It's going to be a heavy wet snow as well. And then we're looking at the trends for some strong storms in parts of Florida. We could see some hail, some really gusty winds, heavy downpours. The tornado threat is low, but it's not at 0. Then by Wednesday, feeling like spring once again in portions of the south. So we have Monday and Tuesday being a little cooler in the south, the Mississippi Valley into the southeast. We rebound nicely by Wednesday. Looking at some northwest rain, still warmer as we look towards the west. And then we're looking at the chance for some snow in the northern tier of the nation into the Great Lakes once again. And then the interior parts of the northeast, also New England, we're looking at some snow as well. Thursday, we're looking at a lot more precipitation, especially in the northern tier of the nation, a wintry blast. Remember, spring starts tomorrow, so we're looking at spring snow. And then we're looking at some rain along the coast of California into Washington, also Oregon. Sunny and mild in parts of the south. Heavy rain and storms in the Carolinas down to the southeast along the Gulf Coast. And we had some heavy rain along the Gulf Coast yesterday, so grounds are pretty saturated. So the big story, again, would be the temperatures. We're looking at record warmth in parts of the west. Here's that dividing line. Spring chill in parts of the east, and we're looking at temperatures well below normal. Some spots even 20 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. Starting out in the west, temperatures in the 60s, 17 degrees above normal in Spokane. But as we look towards Kansas City, Chicago, Nashville, Monroe, we are chilly. Chilly in Nashville today, just 48 degrees. We are 15 degrees below normal. We're going to be chilly once again tomorrow, still warm in the west. But notice that warm air coming further to the east. So we're going to see that by Wednesday and Thursday in parts of the east. And then we're going to rebound nicely in parts of the south. Temperatures above normal in some spots. We're looking at temperatures still chilly in the north, 45 on Thursday in New York City, 46 on Friday. So you're going to need those coats for the first part of spring. Freeze alerts start tonight. We're looking at temperatures well below freezing. You need to cover those plants, sensitive crops as well. And also any pipes that might be exposed could see some bursts if we get down to temperatures into the 20s and 30s. So there's that spring chill. It's going to be cold. You need your coat as you head out to school, to work tomorrow in parts of the south, well below freezing in many spots.
Not something folks expect in late March either in that part of the country.
I know, and it's been so warm that it's, yeah, exactly.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Sure.
Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including the mounting rumors swirling around the whereabouts of Princess Kate after that headline-grabbing manipulated family photo dropped last week. But first, a state of emergency in southern Iceland, where another volcanic eruption is devastating nearby communities, prompting evacuations. We've got the latest in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Iceland is in a state of emergency this morning after a volcano there erupted for the 4th time in 3 months. NBC News International correspondent Josh Letterman has more on the powerful eruption.
A blazing wall of lava is spreading across southern Iceland. A volcano spewing bright orange smoke, seen here in stunning photos from a Coast Guard helicopter for the 4th time in as many months. This time threatening Iceland's most famous tourist attraction, the Blue Lagoon hot spring, where bathers had just minutes to flee.
We're evacuating. Oh, look at that. Wow.
American Melissa Izer's vacation with her husband interrupted mid-meal.
As the waitress is bringing my wine, heard the sound go off, and that's when my husband and I looked at each other and they said, okay, evacuation en route.
Local media say hundreds in a town near the Blue Lagoon have now fled to safety.
Everybody was steady and prepared.
Meteorological authorities say the volcano erupted with little notice, just about 40 minutes, and carved a fissure into the earth nearly 2 miles long, triggering a state of emergency. An orange glow visible from more than 20 miles away in Reykjavik, the capital. Volcanoes are common in Iceland, which sits atop a geological hotspot. This volcano has been erupting roughly once a month since December, but this eruption appears to be the biggest yet. No deaths have been reported. Defensive barriers built to contain the lava are holding so far. But scientists say it may only be the beginning.
We might have eruptions on the peninsula for the on and off for the next few hundred years.
A fiery future for an island where volcanoes are a fact of life. Josh Letterman, NBC News.
Let's talk more about this with Dr. Benjamin Andrews. He's a geologist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Good to have you with us. So this volcanic system in Iceland, it's been dormant for 800 years. Do we know why it's waking up now, and do we expect to see more of this in the coming years?
Sure, those are great questions, and thanks for having me on. It's always hard to forecast exactly why a volcanic eruption is happening at any given spot, any given particular spot. But Iceland, as your correspondent noted a moment ago, does sit atop a hot spot, so there's a lot of magma rising up through the mantle, and it's a spreading ridge. So we have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge goes right across or right underneath Iceland. So we have the North American and European plates pulling apart from each other. So there's a lot of reasons why there are volcanic eruptions at Iceland. And in this particular instance, we can see over the past 5 months, there's been a series of dike intrusions. So that's magma coming into the ground, forcing itself into a crack and making a crack bigger. And then starting in December and then January and February and now March, there have been a series of eruptions. And most of those eruptions have lasted about 3 days or 2 days or even 1 day. And in fact, this eruption right here was very vigorous on Sunday with a fissure that we can see in the screen there that was about 2 miles long. And as of yesterday morning was only about a quarter mile long. So it's very intense opening phase, and then it dies off.
So officials say there's no ash coming out of this explosion. Why is that, and how does this compare to the 2010 eruption that shut down air traffic in Europe? Many of us remember that one well.
Sure. So the first thing we should remember is that volcanic ash is not like ash in your fireplace. It's not bits of burned wood or paper or something. Instead, volcanic ash is little tiny fragments of frozen lava or frozen magma foam. And so in the case of the 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull, the magma came up underneath a glacier and it cooled against that glacier, but then melted that glacier into water and flashed that water into steam, which created an explosive power to rip the magma apart and make big explosions with lots of ash. In the case of the current eruption north of Grindavik, we see that the magma is coming out and it doesn't have any big source of gas to make it explode. And so as a result, it's mostly coming out as lava flows or fire fountains like we see right there, which you could think of as just very vigorous fountains of lava that might go tens or even hundreds of meters into the air, but come down to feed a lava flow.
I know some experts are worried the lava could flow into the North Atlantic Ocean. We only have a few seconds left here, but what are the dangers there?
Yeah, the big danger there is local, within a few hundred meters or a few kilometers, and that's that the hot lava can react with the ocean water to make hydrochloric acid, which you don't want to breathe, and it can also make some volcanic ash that would stay very local. So in that instance, it would again be a hazard within a few miles of where the lava is coming into the water, but not a big threat to global aviation or even to the entire country of Iceland.
All right, Dr. Benjamin Andrews with the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Thank you for your time and expertise this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
More international headlines now. North Korea resumed missile tests this morning, just days after the U.S. and South Korea wrapped up joint military drills. NBC News international correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with more on that and other world news. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. That's right. Japan says that early this morning, North Korea fired 3 short-range ballistic missiles just as the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was attending a conference in the South Korean capital, Seoul. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, said that the missiles landed in the waters between the Korean peninsula and Japan, but that no damage or injuries have been reported. Now, this is only the latest in a sequence of missile tests by North Korea, a trend that Kishida said threatens the peace and safety of Japan, the region, and the international society. Let's go to India now, where the world's largest general elections will be held in April this year. Nearly 1 billion people are eligible to vote in the election that will start April 19 and will last until June the 1st. According to several opinion polls, Bharatiya Janata, the party of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is expected to win a 3rd straight term. But opposition parties have alleged that electronic voting machines can be hacked in favor of the ruling party, a claim refuted by India's election body. And let's go to London now, where a new artwork by the elusive artist Banksy has appeared on the side of a building. Seen from afar, the green paint looks like the foliage of a barren tree, with a stencil of a person holding a pressure hose next to it. Now, the new artwork has been posted on Banksy's social media, therefore confirming it's his. According to art experts familiar with his works, this is a way for him to denounce that nature is struggling and it is up to us to help it grow back. But another thing that may grow because of it is the value of the houses being painted on. One local said that Banksy came overnight and now my rent is skyrocketing. Back to you, Joe.
It's a perspective we often forget about there. All right. Claudio, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
That's right.
This morning, rumors continue to swirl about the whereabouts of the Princess of Wales. Over the weekend, Kate missed one of her traditional outings, the St. Patrick's Day Parade. The princess has not been seen in public since Christmas after undergoing abdominal surgery. And this all comes a week after that family photo, which Kate admitted to altering. NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter has the details.
That's right. Yet another high-profile event passing without Kate, the Princess of Wales. And the Sunday Times has new reporting about Kate's state of mind, how she's coping after talking to her friends. Take a look.
This week, Prince William will be back out and about at royal engagements, while his wife Kate, the Princess of Wales, remains out of sight, upset, according to friends who spoke with the Sunday Times, by the way the last week has played out.
As parents of 3 young children who are not immune to hearing some of the things that are going around in the media and social media, I think they're finding that very hard.
And despite the increased royal load, the Sunday Times reports that those close to William say the Wales family bubble is his top priority. Over the weekend, on their official Instagram page, the Prince and Princess of Wales wished everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. The parade, an event the Princess of Wales has attended in the past, stunning in green, but of course, no sign of her this year as she recovers. In the new reporting, the paper also suggests we may not see Kate until mid-April.
In terms of resuming public duties, that definitely won't be until after the children go back after their school holidays, and that's on April the 17th.
And when we do, that might be a chance for Kate to address her recovery period in public. The Sunday Times spoke with numerous friends of Kate in recent weeks and reports that she's been fully aware of the feeding frenzy around that picture and won't be pressured to respond. One source telling the paper she is not a show pony. But the next opportunity for a photo taken by Kate, like all her children's birthdays, may be little Louis's 6th birthday on April 23rd. No word yet on whether or not that will be taken by his mom or by a professional photographer. In an interview yesterday with the BBC, Princess Diana's brother Charles Spencer compared the public attention on his late sister with the current scrutiny swirling around Kate.
And if we look at what's happening now around the current Princess of Wales, do you think the dangers of that online, almost sort of conspiracy world are more potent than the press intrusion that you have fought against?
No, I think it was more dangerous back in the day.
Do you worry, though, about what's happened to the truth?
I do worry about what happened to the truth.
Now, the next time we'll see Prince William is tomorrow morning at an event here in the UK. We'll be listening closely to see if he offers any clues or any news about his wife.
All right, Molly, thank you so much. Coming up, trouble in paradise after the break, terror in one popular Florida beach community as a deadly shooting rocks St. Patrick's Day and spring break celebrations. We've got the latest as police search for suspects. Stay with us. Over the weekend in Miami Beach, authorities activated an emergency midnight curfew. They were trying to protect spring break visitors and locals from the violence that's flared in years past. Well, those measures seemed to work. There were incidents in other parts of the state. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has been following these spring break crackdowns for weeks. Joins us from Miami Beach with more details. Sam, good morning.
Joe, good morning. This has been the safest spring break here in Miami Beach in years after those crackdown measures, as you mentioned. Unfortunately, other parts of Florida saw violence erupt, specifically Jacksonville Beach overnight, Joe, as we just heard from police that there were a series of 3 shootings over the period of about 40 minutes. Unrelated, it led to 3 people being injured and 1 person killed, as police right now are searching for multiple suspects.
Overnight, terror at a spring break hotspot. A series of shootings in about 40 minutes in Jacksonville, Florida, that left 3 injured and 1 dead.
80 people were running down the street. Watch a dude drop to his knees.
Police saying the shootings happened in the popular beachfront area where many people were gathered celebrating St. Patrick's Day and enjoying spring break. Adding there were multiple incidents, at least 1 involving a gang member, and warning,
I want you to come to Jacksonville Beach. I want you to live here. I want you to visit.
But if you break the law, we're going to put you in jail.
And it's not the only town facing issues as spring break heats up.
We got a fight over there.
In New Smyrna Beach, Florida, just north of Orlando, a fight escalating. And video clearly shows a beachgoer taking out a firearm, prompting Volusia County Sheriff's deputies to draw their weapons on a suspect they say is 16.
Drop the gun!
Officers chasing down the teenager before he rushed through crowds of spring breakers and into the ocean. After a 5-minute standoff, the teen was arrested and later charged. But in stark contrast, hours south in Miami Beach, where there's been spring break tension in the past, it was another calm weekend on the city's iconic streets. Thanks in part to a midnight curfew enacted for 72 hours after city officials noticed crowds growing.
There was a tension that was building. People were, in fact, intoxicated, and we could see it. And so that causes friction.
The city reinforcing its hard line against revelers with measures and messaging.
This isn't working anymore.
And it's not us. It's you.
Apparently paying dividends during a tricky time for all cities here.
How effective would you say so far all of these measures have been?
So far, we are pleased. We've had no acts of violence.
Back to Jacksonville Beach now, and officers say their response time there was zero. There was such a large police presence already in town, Joe. They also said they showed immense restraint. No officers fired their weapons as there were thousands of people in the background, and they were trying to protect everybody's safety. Back to you.
Sam Brock. Sam, thank you so much. New details this morning on a frightening scene that crossed state lines. Authorities arrested Andre Gordon after a dramatic standoff in New Jersey over the weekend. Gordon allegedly killed 3 family members in Falls Township, a suburban community just outside Philadelphia, before carjacking a driver and taking off. The search for Gordon forced some communities to go into lockdown for 2 days. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the latest.
This was the scene in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in a suburb just outside Philadelphia.
Right out my back window, there were cops running around with guns.
A community was placed in lockdown as authorities responded to the threat of an armed suspect.
It's quite scary.
According to police, a man allegedly assaulted a woman in this housing development. The suspect eventually surrendering after a 2.5-hour standoff.
We were able to successfully locate the gentleman and place him into custody without incident and no injuries to police.
The dramatic scene less than 24 hours after the harrowing scenes in neighboring Falls Township, Bucks County.
I don't know if I've actually processed it. You know what I mean?
Authorities arresting and charging 26-year-old Andre Gordon, who they say murdered 3 of his family members before crossing state lines into Trenton, New Jersey, where police say he had taken hostages inside a home. These dramatic images of SWAT officers pulling people from a roof, the suspect somehow breaking through the police line, but later surrendered less than a mile from the home.
Well, it's apparent that he left before the police arrived.
Court documents obtained by NBC News revealing authorities say Gordon used a so-called ghost gun to commit the murders and carjack 2 individuals. Police say one of those victims was Sonia Hansen.
And then he pulled the gun out, and my grandson seen the gun. He's only 9 years old. He jumped out the car and ran.
Gordon now faces multiple charges related to the murders, carjackings, and possession of weapons, according to authorities. Now, we have seen people stop by the home here, none speaking with us, and you can see there is some plywood on the front door, possibly related to the forced entry. Police noted. Now, that suspect is expected to be extradited back to Pennsylvania in the coming days. Back to you.
All right. Thanks to George Solis for that report. Coming up, 10 items or less. Some big changes coming to the checkout counter at one big retailer. What you need to know about Target's new policy that'll have customers limiting their self-checkout purchases. Stay with us. It's next. Welcome back. A landmark settlement could dramatically change the way we buy and sell homes. It could also potentially lower home prices. Now, if the settlement is approved by a federal court, the National Association of Realtors, which is the largest trade group in the nation, would pay $418 million to settle class action lawsuits over broker commissions. As part of the settlement, they'll admit to no wrongdoing. The settlement would also allow buyers and sellers to negotiate fees and compensation with agents up front, eliminating that 6% sales commission that's so common in many home sales. For more, let's bring in Erin Sykes. She's the chief economist and real estate wealth advisor at Nest Seekers International. Erin, good to have you with us this morning. So talk to us. What's the impact of this? Who is this going to affect most?
So I actually have to disagree with the opening statement in that things are not going to change that much. Now, this allegation is that there was price fixing and that there was a standardized 6% commission split between the buyer and the seller on every single transaction. And reminder, this case goes back to the state of Missouri. And real estate is actually governed locally, so we're licensed state by state, and then each municipality also has different standards. And never was there a standardized 6% fee. It was always negotiable. So the only change here is how things are going to be listed in MLS. And rather than having the buyer's fee listed transparently on MLS, be it 2%, 2.5%, or 3%, now that's going to be a conversation topic for the agents.
Did a lot of home buyers maybe not realize that that was something they could negotiate? Maybe that's one of the reasons this is so eye-opening for so many?
You know, I think maybe a first-time home buyer might not be aware of it, but frankly, as an agent who does 50 transactions a year, the number of times I have actually received the full 3% commission on a buy side is very rare, maybe 10 out of those 50 times. So I think the most important thing is having an agent who can advocate on your behalf. And really the goal is to get the deal done. And that's why we negotiate these fees. Now, they might be written in a listing agreement one way, but in order to get the transaction across the line, we are negotiating them every single time.
So, I mean, for the average home buyer and seller, now they're going into this wondering about commissions. What can both sides do to ensure they are getting the best deal here? What do you think these negotiations do look like?
So I think that it's still going to be a cooperative commission structure. And all that means is that the seller is paying their broker the commission, and be that 4, 5, 6%, we don't know because it will be negotiated. But then the split between that seller's broker and the buyer's broker is what the conversation is going to be. So it is important for that buyer to have the conversation up front with their broker about what type of commission are you expecting to get paid. Now, that said, this is already baked into the price, and it's like any other industry. When you buy a car, when you buy insurance, there's always a middleman, a salesperson that is somehow getting paid. So nobody's expecting charity work here. And I think that the most important thing is to make sure you have that agent advocating on your behalf and making sure that they are a strong agent, because I do think what's going to happen here is there will be a fallout because we have so many licensed agents in the United States, perhaps too many. So trimming the fat a little bit would not be the worst case scenario.
All right, Erin Sykes, thanks so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it. This morning, we're taking an in-depth look at new changes to the self-checkout lanes at one of America's favorite retailers. Target announced that it is restricting the number of items you can buy in self-checkout. So why are they doing it, and what could this mean for the future of shopping? NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans explains.
Hey there, we all have those feelings about self-checkout kiosks at stores. Some people prefer them for their speed and efficiency, while others are put off by their technical challenges. Now, Target is the latest retailer to introduce big changes to self-checkout, leading to even more controversy over these do-it-yourself machines.
Whether you love it,
I did not have to talk to a single person,
or loathe it.
Can we just all boycott self-checkout? Like, I'm so sick of it.
This morning, there are big changes in the self-checkout aisle. Target now limiting purchases to 10 items or less in self-checkout. The new policy already in effect at most stores nationwide. Why? Target says its pilot tests found the restriction made self-checkout twice as fast and improved the customer experience. It comes as the do-it-yourself option meant to get you out of the store quicker and reduce face-to-face interactions continues to cause technical hurdles for some consumers.
I stood there for almost 10 minutes. Help is on the way. Help is on the way.
We found mixed reaction to Target's new policy.
The line goes quicker, but also I feel like it's not very convenient for some people that take
are buying a lot of stuff. I like someone that's doing it for me. I don't really like touching the screens, to be honest with you.
Target follows other major retailers also checking out of self-checkout. According to multiple retail analysts, self-checkout machines increase the risk of theft and in some cases outweigh the investments companies made in them. At Walmart, some stores are experimenting with limiting self-checkout to delivery drivers and paid subscribers to the Walmart Plus app, this during high traffic times. A spokesperson says the decision is intended to better manage checkout availability. Dollar General is removing self-checkout machines from hundreds of its stores, in part to reduce shoplifting. And Costco has started screening membership cards in its self-checkout lanes after noticing more cases of card sharing. But for some shoppers, there's simply no substitute for a real human cashier.
As a mom who has 3 kids with her, usually everything's just chaotic as is.
With concerns, confusion, and the reported increase in theft, why are stores keeping self-checkouts? According to one survey from last year, 2/3 of shoppers say they would choose self-checkout over a human-run counter. Back to you.
All right, Christine Romans, thank you. More financial news now. The White House pushing the Senate to pass that TikTok bill. CNBC's Silvana Henao has that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, so the White House says the Senate should move swiftly to pass the bill that would force TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance to sell the social media platform or face a U.S. ban. Now, the bill passed by an overwhelming margin in the House last week, and President Biden says he'll sign it. However, momentum has slowed in the Senate, which is more divided on the issue, and lawmakers also face tough budget talks this week to avoid a partial government shutdown on Friday. DirecTV is giving subscribers the choice to cut local stations from their package for as long as they want and get a discount. So your bill could be reduced by $12 a month or $144 a year. And DirecTV says customers could test the feature by cutting local stations in the summer. That's when most networks are airing repeats, and add them again in the fall when shows return and the NFL season kicks off. Local stations are often at the center of disputes between media companies and cable and satellite providers. And Sony has hit pause on production of the latest PlayStation virtual reality headset as unsold inventory is piling up. Bloomberg reports sales of the wearable device, which is an accessory for the PS5 and costs $550, have slowed since its launch just over a year ago. Sony has produced more than 2 million units. Sony and Meta have been among the leading makers of virtual reality gear, but both have struggled to attract enough content to make their platforms compelling, Joe.
All right, Silvana, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, the stage is set for March Madness. After the break, who we're watching this season as those big dance brackets take shape. That's next on Morning News Now. We're back now with what you would call a little sock snafu. A women's Super League soccer match between Chelsea and Arsenal was delayed by 30 minutes on Friday after both teams took the field wearing, get this, matching socks. That's right, believe it or not, this soccer sin is actually against the rules, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Teams have to wear different colored socks, but with both showing up wearing white, that was a problem. To fix Sockgate, so to speak, Arsenal had to foot the bill and buy black socks from a local mega store in Chelsea before the game could even begin. Chelsea did sock it to Arsenal, winning 3-1. Finally this hour, in one of the surest signs of spring, it's time to start filling out your brackets for your office pool. The matchups are now set for this year's men's and women's NCAA tournaments, which get underway this week. Now, on the men's side, the UConn Huskies are the top overall seed. They're looking to repeat as champs. And on the women's side, South Carolina is looking to avenge their loss in last year's Final Four. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch joins us now from Cleveland with a preview of this year's big dance. Jesse, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. You're talking about spring, but it's snowing here in Cleveland right now, so the March Madness is definitely in full swing here already. I think there are a lot of basketball fans out there that are probably packing bags, booking flights, booking hotels right now, because we now know who's in and where every school will be playing. Between women and men, we're talking about 136 teams all getting ready for the big dance.
From first-timers to tournament regulars, this morning college campuses nationwide waking up with hoop dreams. Because the March Madness brackets are set.
Just with our sights on winning basketball games.
Hats off to teams like the Stetson Hatters men's squad from Florida, making their first ever tournament appearance.
What we did, it wasn't given, it was earned.
It's no surprise others, like the Iowa Hawkeyes women, are back in the big dance. The one seed led by superstar Caitlin Clark, who's not only having a record-breaking season, but has been helping the women's game surge in popularity.
If we want to reach our goals in March, we're going to have to find ways to win that aren't always pretty.
We don't even know who's playing in the national championships yet. But ticket resale site TickPick says as of last night, its cheapest ticket for the women's title game was $419, more than double the minimum price to see the men play. Beyond star power, the brackets also have plenty of underdogs, including America's 2022 favorites, the St. Peter's Peacocks, who became the first men's 15 seed to reach the Elite Eight. And even before the madness officially begins, March's conference tournaments already producing upsets and buzzer beaters. On Sunday, Duquesne beat VCU in the Atlantic 10 Tournament Championship, clinching a men's tournament spot for the first time in almost 50 years. But the party started a little too early when confetti began falling mid-game. But now every team is back to square one. It's time to go dancing.
Make sure you lock in your bracket picks before the first rounds. That's on Thursday for the men and Friday for the women. And the question here in Cleveland is, will we be seeing Caitlin Clark in the Final Four and potentially a national title game right there? That's next month. But I know for now, Joe, you and I are going to be paying attention to an 8-9 matchup later this week.
Yes, go Cats. Northwestern, we'll see what happens. All right, Jesse, from slightly snowy Cleveland. There you go. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now. Stay with us. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.